I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And my apologies for speaking in English. I wish I could, my Arabic was better, but here we are. And I kind of wish I went before Ibrahim, because he's said a lot of the things that I would have intended to. I don't know whether this war is about to end or there's going to be significant progress in it. The words that come to mind to me are war weariness. Are the parties concerned so weary of fighting the same thing over and over that the costs of continuing outweigh any advantages in doing so? I don't think that the war is going to end soon, but I do think there is a glimmer of hope, at least, in something resembling ceasefire, interim ceasefire, in which talks can begin to take place and to take precedence. Does that mean that there will be a united Yemen in the near future? I find that hard to imagine. There are three systems of government that operate in the world today. The first is unitary, in which the central government holds nearly all power. We don't have that case in Yemen. We don't have it in many states. The second is federal, in which there is power sharing between a central government and the individual states. The third is confederal, in which largely autonomous states or regions hold power with a very weak or restricted central government. Often confederal arrangements lead to federations, to an active federal government. There are numerous examples of this happening. The Swiss Confederation, despite the official name of the country, is now a federation, but it took centuries for it to achieve that status. If we look at other examples around the world, there's Malaysia, in which a federation of different states on the Malay Peninsula organized with Sarawak and Sabah and Singapore for a time, to create a country which has not only the state governments that have their own hereditary leaders or governors, but a national government with an elected assembly and a prime minister. Closer to home, the United Arab Emirates, which began as 7 independent, certainly in technical internal terms, independent states that were banded together in a federal union, but jealously retained as much sovereignty as they possibly could for such a long time. It took more than a decade for the armed forces of each of these individual emirates to be merged into a single armed force, for example. The European Union is perhaps another example in which individual states have created a federal structure with a central government that carries out many of the functions that are necessary. The problem with applying these kinds of models to Yemen at present is that we do not have states, federal states, mini states, whatever you want to call them. There are no systems of government. The central government is broken. Let me offer a different approach called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity grows out of Western social thought for more than a century. It's been adopted as a principle of the European Union. The Oxford English Dictionary defines subsidiarity as the principle that a central authority should have a subsidiary function performing only those tasks which cannot be performed at a more local level. In other words, in political terms, decentralization. That perhaps there is scope, once a ceasefire can be achieved, to create perhaps a national conference, somewhat along the lines of the National Dialogue Conference, to have representatives of every party concerned, not just the warlords, not just the Southerners of various groups, but of tribes, for example, and particularly the cities, Sana'a, Hodeidah, Taiz, of the popular activism that brought down Ali Abdullah Saleh, an emphasis on carrying out functions at a local level first, and then consolidating those functions, a role for a central government that is constituted not under the present leadership that the Saudis have a vested interest in protecting, but one that perhaps has at least a titular head of someone who is highly respected and neutral, perhaps a Qadi Abdurrahman al-Iryani for the 21st century, in order to begin by discussing the particular requirements and the functions that need to be carried out at the very beginning, and with the emphasis of doing it on the local level. And I look to the example of the local development associations in the 1970s, in which that kind of initiative was taken by people individually, individual groups, and carried out. Perhaps the best model in this case for Yemen would be Somalia. And right, Somalia has gone through 30 years of strife. It has largely been classified a failed state, but there are indications that it is now approaching perhaps a fragile status. An interim constitution was adopted in 2012. A federal government was established in 2013, a federal government that shares functions with a number of constituent states, not all of them. Somaliland and Puntland are not part of this yet, but functions are beginning to be carried out. For so many years, Somalia was in arrears to the International Monetary Fund and could not get outside assistance, and that is changing. Western diplomatic missions have returned to Mogadishu for the first time. These are initial steps that can, in fact, produce results.
Okay, John Peterson, thank you very much for that.